This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Inner Healing Paths. This episode is titled Healing Through Culture, Leadership, Social Justice, and Curanderismo with Dr. Patty Ramirez. So we have a conversation with Dr. Patty and all things related to healing and reconnecting to our ancestral ways. She is the founder of Colibri, which is an organization that focuses on healing through traditional, ancestral, cultural, and social justice modalities. Dr. Patty talks to us about her journey of discovering her calling, incorporating indigenous healing practices to everything she does, from social justice activism to candle making. She shares about the healing path of Curanderismo and her own journey in connecting with her inner brujandera. So I know you will love this episode, and without further ado, take a listen.
Hi, Patty. How are you? Thank you so much.
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Just busy as usual with the baby and everything that I have going on. But I'm here, and I'm glad we were finally able to meet. I know we were talking about this for a few weeks, and it finally happened.
I know it's so long overdue, but I think it's so needed.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for your time and for being here.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. So to get started, can you share with our listeners a little bit about you, where you're from, and just tell us who you are.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's such a loaded question nowadays.
Absolutely. So wherever you want to start, it's okay.
Yes. You know what? I'm just gonna be very grounded with this intro. I'm a Chicana Indígena Salvadoreña. I identify as she, her, hers. I'm a fierce advocate. I'm a sister. I am a comadre. I am a self-proclaimed brujandera. I'm also just so passionate about helping the collective reconnect to our intuition and to our inner medicine, our magic. But aside from that, if we're talking about titles, I am a social worker. I got my doctorate this past year, literally the day before my birthday.
Congratulations. Big accomplishment. Yes, absolutely.
Gracias. I'm still celebrating.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and just I'm always evolving. I'm a human being first and foremost. Or what I like to say is I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. And so life for me is a remembering, right? A remembering of my essence and my magic and my medicine. So I'm excited to be here with everyone, with all your listeners.
Absolutely. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. You mentioned brujandera, so I love that. Can you tell us what that is and
yes.
What does that mean for those that don't know you?
For me, and this is so like I mentioned earlier, I identify as Chicana Indígena, and so through my lineage of being Mexican and Salvadorian, I am uplifting my indigenous cultural healing practices, and specifically in Mexican Mayan traditions, which is what you would consider the region of Mexico, El Salvador, the Northern Triangle, like Honduras and Guatemala. There's hundreds of indigenous groups and indigenous practices. But for me, I'm elevating the practices of Curanderismo, and also the magic that I've always been connected to, so the bruja, which, it has such a negative connotation, or it has historically. So brujandera is a way to integrate the magic and the medicine, right? And I love to claim that and to own that and to stand in my power. I have elders who say, you don't call yourself a curandera, the community does, right? So the reason why I choose to reclaim brujandera is because for a long time, women of color are told to doubt themselves, are trained, are taught to seek external validation. And although the community is so important, and I don't take community care and the caring for my communities lightly, I also need to own my own validation.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And you mentioned a few things that I want to go into a little bit later. But for now, just to open up this conversation and to open up the space, as you know, my podcast is called Inner Healing Paths, and that's because I believe there are so many paths that lead to healing. And I wanted to ask you to get started is from your line of work, or just from your own personal healing journey. How does healing happen? What does it look like for you from your perspective?
Yes. That right away, it made me think of this image that has been circulating, and it's a scribble. Like, it's like just going everywhere.
Yes, I've seen it. Yes.
You've seen it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
We might actually make more memes about it after this. But healing has been that. And, one thing that I say often, and this is how I started my doctoral capstone defense, is, so I was born at 6 months. I was supposed to be born in March. I was born in December. I say that when I was born, I started life, fighting for my life, and I haven't stopped since, right? Because my trajectory, like a lot of my path, was around social justice. Like, as a youth organizer in East Los Angeles, I was always like in the advocacy world. And, most of the things that I advocated for, I was also directly impacted, or my family was. So, being someone who, has witnessed, others being deported, incarcerated, who, my father was murdered in El Salvador by police, a lot of different aspects, experience different forms of violence. For me, on top of that, there was, the idea that of disconnection that kind of like, it's something I carried with me, and I didn't actually recognize it until I was like burning out from the work, right? And I realized, oh my gosh, like, I'm so disconnected from myself, from my body, from my lineage. I didn't grow up with my father, and so I didn't know my Salvadorian side, and then my family, through migration, colonization, and assimilation, we lost, or should I say, a lot of our practices were stolen and taken, right? And so one of the wounds that I carried was that I felt fragmented, like Koyoshauki,
Yeah. So beautiful.
Yeah.
The way you put it, and it's so true. I mean, we're that sense of feeling disconnected, and and just like that fragmentation that is so I mean, because we're conditioned to go, and then it's not until something that it starts impacting that we realize, wow, like I'm burned out. But really what what you shared is we're just disconnected, fragmented, we're spread thin, thin, and we, there's a process of healing, which is really the process of remembering, right? And we play with that word of remembrance.
Yes.
Putting
the pieces
home
together. Yeah. Coming home to ourselves. It's so interesting because we are in the West direction and in the Mexica tradition, which is all about rest and transformation. And Koyo Shauki is a huge energy during this time. And it's someone that I've resonated with since high school, right? It was when I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a lot more layers. And I remembered the idea of like dismemberment, right? Feeling fragmented, remembering wasn't just around our collective memory, because for many of us, intergenerational trauma resulted in losing, or kind of like letting go, escaping, forgetting. And so the remembering piece wasn't just about the somatics, like the body, like the actually putting the pieces together. It was also about reframing my relationship to myself, right? And I talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of like the external validation versus the internal validation that comes from me. And similarly, the remembering, I have to remember that I already know. I have the medicine. I don't need to outsource my healing. I can give it to myself.
It is so powerful, that what you just said. I don't have to outsource my healing. So I just want to stop there for a second and just like really, and hopefully our listeners, can just really take that in. What does that mean? It's when we're outsourcing our healing. Do you mind speaking a little bit more about, just from your perspective, what does that look like? What would be, in your experience, how are we doing that, or how are folks doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people in my life, and including myself, that I was going to every class, every seminar, I was paying for every training back to back, and expecting someone else to do the work for me. Right. And it wasn't until I realized like, oh, like I'm going to all of these things and nothing has changed. Right. And so I was like, something's not quite right. And, and I think, when we are in the journey of healing, it can feel addicting because there's a false sense of control of like, oh, I'm owning my journey by going to all of these experts, right? And we forget that we are the expert of our own experience.
That's the concept of bypassing, right? Whether it's through spiritual practices, but even through healing modalities, right? Like you said, the constantly buying this class and this seminar and going to that experience and doing the, it could be, and because we get caught up with this, and like you said, there's that addictive component of just the buying of the experience, and almost it feels like it's well, maybe this is it, right? Maybe this is what takes me to that next level, and then we just realize, well, no, that's not it, and we keep going, because like you said, the work, only we can do that for ourselves. No one else can do that. There's no magic wand, and I think I was just talking with someone else earlier, and it's like so many people just want the quick fix, shortcut to healing. But the reality is that it takes time, and just in the folks that I work with and the folks that I know, and even for you, you mentioned, you've been on this journey since you were 6 months, in your mom's womb. I mean, this has taken years of unfolding, little by little, and there's many setbacks. I think you mentioned that meme earlier, the up and down, squiggly, squiggly line.
Yes.
That's what it is, and until we really realize that it's going to take time, I think we can start slowing down on how much we consume and outsource, like you said, outsource our healing and just kind of just be okay with where we're at and just allowing our own, or tapping in, I should say, tapping into our own medicine that we all have. And we do need guides sometimes, we do need someone to guide us, and that can be in many different ways, or the guide, the teacher, the mentor. It could come in many ways, but I believe that we do need that. But at some point we do have to take responsibility for doing that work within ourselves, and I think that's what you were alluding to.
Yeah, and the word that comes up for me is integration. Like, I think that when we speak about being addicted to healing or outsourcing healing or getting all the tools, right? Like, I'm getting a new tarot deck this week, a new wand, like a new crystal, because this is supposed to magically fix everything. What I'm not doing is I'm not integrating. I'm not actually spending time slowing down the wound and, really just feeling into what needs are surfacing, what wisdom, but also what blocks and resistance, because those hold wisdom too, right? And so that isn't happening, and that's the work. And I think many of us maybe don't quite embrace that work because it is so uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable, and we, many of us don't have the skills to sit in that discomfort or in that grief.
Yeah, I mean, many people don't have the guidance, the tools, resourcing them, and yeah, it is very uncomfortable, and it's not easy to. So you mentioned the slowing down and connecting and really allowing these feelings to come through. That's hard work. It's painful, and it's a lot easier. I think you mentioned just going out and buying something, an experience or a tool, a concrete tool. It feels a lot easier to do, and of course it is, but that's not where the healing happens, right? The healing happens, like you said, in integrating, right? Whatever it is that you're learning into your, not just your mind, your body, but your heart, right? And even at a soul level, right? Things have to come together. There has to be a remembrance of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure we can keep talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much just in that. But you mentioned the West directions, and you're in Curanderismo, and I know that's something that you're very passionate about. And I don't know too much about it. I know we actually met through, I started studying with one of our elders or teachers, and unfortunately I wasn't able to continue on that path, so I didn't get to really dive into that and all of that wonderful, just there's so much wisdom, so much knowledge there. But I know you've continued and you've grown, and you've really been connected to that world. So can you share with our listeners a little bit more about curanderismo, just the way you see it, what you, from your personal journey, and just what that is all about these days?
Yeah. For me, or at least in my journey, the way that I've seen curanderismo is it really allows for the integration of mind, body, heart, and spirit. And so, for I think many folks would say, oh, it's spiritual practices, indigenous practices, but it's actually very expansive. Like, there's so much that can happen within curanderismo, and there's many different types of healing within, and healers actually, because you have people who practice and are very maybe skilled at working with plant medicine, por ejemplo, like remedies. And then there's people who do more like pláticas, what would be akin to talk therapy. Or there's others that do body work, like sobadas or hueseros. So there's a lot of different components, but it is a relational worldview that looks at all the elements as needed so that there is an overall balance. And so when we talk about directions, we're talking about the elements of water, earth, fire, and air. And we're also talking about north, south, east, and west, and the wisdom that comes from each direction in each element. And so when coupled together, it can be a source of healing for many folks who resonate with these traditions. So it's been a remembering for me. And it's also a place of wounding, right? Because through my work and through seeking elders that are outside of my own blood lineage, it's been affirming in the sense that some of the things that I've been able to experience and learn actually are things that my family does and knows that I uncovered, right? It kind of, this journey led to an unraveling of some sort. But then other pieces, such as being Mexican Salvadorian, being, Mexica Mayan, like I've been holding a lot of complexity, right? And also knowing that I don't know exactly, like I can't trace my lineage exactly. And so I know, the wound that comes from being fragmented in that way, right? The cultural fragmentation, if you will.
Absolutely, that's so beautiful, and that's the cultural fragmentation part. That's, I mean, I think we are all in that, and some of us may be more aware of it than others, and that's where, if you're aware of something, then you're able to heal from it, right? But and unfortunately, a lot of folks still, I don't think there's it's not mainstream, right? The understanding of how of this sense of culturally how fragmented we are, especially just if you just think about just in Latin America, right? Or not even just Mexico, Central America, and Latin America, how divided it is, right? Even every there's a lot of pride in each country, and I understand, and I totally understand that but I also feel that we would be so much more powerful if we can all just see each other as just this huge territory of land, but that I think part of the programming is for us to feel so fragmented, to feel that I'm not like those from this country, and it just, but that fragmentation is just so, there's layers, right? When we're talking about just mentally from an individual level, and then there's a community level, and now we're talking about just the wider, just being Latinx, and or however you identify, in that sense. So it's just such a layered process that we're talking about here in terms of feeling fragmented in many ways.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you right now is like, how do we get to a place where we can stand in our collective power, right? And our collective wisdom. Absolutely. And our collective medicine.
Yeah. And what's coming to mind right now is that one of the things that I really appreciated from our teacher, Maestra Cici, what I just remember her phrase is la medicina es para todos, and that for me that really resonates, because I believe, yes, there is appropriation, and there's people that use indigenous healing practices for profit without any respect to the culture and where it comes from and the origins of that. But there's also folks that truly have an appreciation and value and honor these traditions that may not be from the same background as these traditions, right? So I really appreciate that, because it's part of the integration that we're talking about, to see that the medicine, whichever path, is for everybody, right? And if someone comes into our lives in search of that, why not? Just because they don't look like me, they're not like me in whatever way. Yeah.
I love that. It's so interesting because, I think I mentioned earlier, like there's so much diversity, even within, the regions of Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. But there's so many interconnectedness, so much interconnectedness, actually. And even like if like up north, like here, where we have a lot of Native American indigenous groups, who a lot of the worldview, there's things that kind of reflect some of the other practices and traditions, and so it's just really interesting to see the parallels.
Absolutely. There's so many parallels, just throughout the Americas, right? Like just in this part of I think we have so much. There's so many similarities, and there's also very rich differences in diversity. And yeah, we can we can talk about this. Could be a whole other podcast. But I do want to go back to what we started with Curanderismo, and you mentioned how it's just so broad, and with there's the plants, the healing through plants, and then there's healings through body work and pláticas, and then there's just that energy, the energetic component, right, of healing that I know. What I've learned is that it's a big component, that the tending to the spirit, our soul, our energy body, and so when it comes to just your own practice of curanderismo, how which one do you feel more like you gravitate towards? What part do you feel that is your medicine, what you have to share, what you can share?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I think, I'm in a place where I know that I'm still evolving and connecting and allowing new medicine to surface. But, as a social worker, as someone who, for a long time has known that I have that empathy, that I'm able to have, compassion for others, and also guide others to have compassion to the self. Pláticas was like a given for me that, I can do that. But I've also really loved and have incorporated more of like the plant medicine work. And I have, as you know, I have a micro enterprise called Wild Luna Botanicals.
Yeah.
And I do like affirmation candle work, intention candles. And so that's a little bit more of like the bruja piece. But, I incorporate plantita medicine in all of my candles. I create tea blends, and especially like around grief and heart healing, but also womb healing. So those are, some of the things that have surfaced within my journey of, this could be real medicine that I carry. And then, of course, working with crystals and other types of energy healing. I realized that that's something that really I'm very attracted to. I love learning about it. And I love, integrating those different components with other pieces like astrology and so forth.
So you just have a very eclectic approach, right? It sounds like there's a little bit of everything that you incorporate in the work that you do. And are you doing, so I know that you're more of a macro, right, social worker, and for our folks listening, would you mind sharing a little bit more of that macro level work that you do?
Yeah, and it's gonna feel a little bit more like a pivot for those of us listening, but not really if you think about the conversation we've been having. So, for the last decade, over the last decade, my work has been specifically with immigrant victims of crime, and specifically victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, but also those fleeing violence and persecution. So people seeking asylum. And so that has been my work, like doing more policy advocacy work, community organizing, immigrant rights advocacy. And currently, I actually oversee 7 different sites for a big organization, and they're working directly with unaccompanied children. So I support and build capacity for these legal service providers. And so again, a lot of my macro work is really supporting others and also naming that this work is hard and hard work. And so the way that I show up everywhere is, how do we integrate healing in every aspect of our work? Because we have attorneys, social workers, and other professionals in the front lines burning out. And so again, like everything kind of, it's a full circle, because now I'm integrating that in the work that I do, the consulting and coaching work that I do with these organizations. And it's something that I feel like I will continue to do, just integrating healing in organizations, in community organizing work, and in the work with unaccompanied children and with immigrant populations. So that's just a little, like, the cliff notes, but very long-winded notes of some of the other work that I do.
Yeah, but it sounds that regardless of the level that you're working on, whether it's through with one-on-one or working with working with organization or advocacy, that you bring in that element of the brujandera, right?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like that's your almost like your signature, your brand, right? If you want to put it in a way, it's like it sounds like you incorporate this in whatever project you're working on, but this is the golden thread.
Yes, it really is. And it didn't come easy, because it can be really hard to carry the title Doctora Patti and then show up the way that I do, right? It's a lot of keeping my mask off. And what I mean by that is, often there's a quote unquote way of being professional. And many of us wear, different masks to show up and be able to survive in these spaces. And for me, like, part of my healing journey, not only did it make me remember who I was, not only did it help me reconnect to my personal power, but it also helped me unravel my essence. And it was one of those experiences where I was like, I don't ever want to pretend or perform that I am anybody else but myself. And as soon as I was able to be unapologetic about that, it was like, this is who I am, and people are really valuing my expertise for coming the way that I am and choosing to show up authentically and, in my medicine. Like, people, my supervisors, like, wow, like, you're so magic. To be told that and affirm that, it wouldn't have happened if I was still performing, right?
Well, I think people gravitate to authenticity, just being real, right? Being genuine wherever you're at. And one thing that I want to just emphasize what you just shared is not playing small, right? And being able to step fully into whatever role or capacity, but being fully there as yourself, not as how you want others to see you. But it sounds like what you've been working on is just being your authentic self, and just fully and being as expansive and as big as you need to be, given whatever it is that's going on for you.
Yes, taking that space.
Yeah, to take up space. Absolutely.
Space.
Yeah, and that in and of itself is part of the healing journey, right? To be able to take up space, to feel like I am worthy to play big and take up as much space as I need to. And what a privilege it is to be able to show up as yourself, because we think about so many people, just especially a lot of women in our lives, that couldn't do that, right? So for us to in this generation, for us to be able to acknowledge, and maybe we're not fully there, but at least to be having these conversations about what that even means.
Yeah. And what's at stake if we do, and what's at stake if we don't, right? Like being able to have that check-in of like what happens if I continue the way that I have been, and what's the alternative, right? And one of them will bring healing and transformation, and the other will continue to enact harm in some way, right? So those are just, those were the things that I had to weigh, and that I continue to negotiate depending on, what new spaces I begin to take on.
Yeah. And for you, what was that moment when you realized, okay, this is my golden thread, or, I don't know how you want to phrase it, but this is what I bring. This is what I show up. That, when you found that authentic self, what was that moment like for you? What was going on?
What's so interesting? So the moment, unfortunately, did not happen out of nowhere. I think I was actively trying to not just redefine myself, but I was really trying to connect to my essence. And, I have a colleague, an intern, actually, an MSW intern, who said, Dr. Patty, what's your story? Like, if I was introducing you, what would I say about you? And she kept being very insistent and firm and direct with that question. And I was like, damn, what is my story? What is my brand, right? And I really I lit my poposhkomi. I made a ceremony out of it and ritual, and just sat with that. What am I here to do? Who am I? And it kind of happened, the fire was still tending, and for many of us that carry saumerios, that are fire keepers, it represents your essence, your heart. And so it's very important that you keep it strong, right? And so for me, I noticed how strong it was, and I was like, I'm here to reimagine how we heal and lead, right? Because like we've talked about, there's a different narrative of healing that is, being emphasized in this experience, right? Through social media, through when we talk about self-care, and all of that. And for me, I was like, we need something different. We need to decolonize healing, right? And we also need to just reimagine a way to lead this work, to lead our families, our communities, our mentees, our classrooms, our organizations, and to lead in a way that is centered in healing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like for you, it was you just had to sit with that question, right? That your colleague was asking, what is your story? And through that process of going within, sounds like you were able to come up with a working narrative of what is your story, what is your brand. And a lot of times I know that for myself and for many folks, we have many stories, right? There's so many different things that happen that shape us at different points, whether even before we were born, right? We already have a story. We already have ancestors that have shaped that for us, and then we come into this world, and then we have our own experiences, and then we have many different stories that shape who we are, right? And but what I like with what you shared is just being able to sit with that and to really connect with that. That's hard to do also, right? Even when we're not deliberately trying to heal, we're just trying to make sense of, wait, who am I? Right? What's my story? Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? There's already so many narratives that are being made of us by others. And so for me, you're right. Like it was really hard to even make space for me to redefine my narrative, right? Because often, even the stories that we carry, sometimes and most often, it's not even our voice, right? I think a lot about like inner child trauma, and a lot of the stories that I carry from childhood that are the voices of those that were supposed to protect me and care for me, and are not actually my own voice, because 7-year-old me did not think like that. You know what I mean? And so the unraveling the story was a big thing. And being able to look at what I do that feels authentic to me, and then use that as evidence, right? Because oftentimes we will take stories that have no evidence and allow them to be those limiting beliefs that we carry. The beliefs that, oh, we're not worthy, I'm not good enough, I need to be perfect, you know. Yeah, it's hard work, and I'm constantly trying to unravel, because it's a journey.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And like we were mentioning earlier, there's really no shortcuts, right? We just have to, I mean, life is just going to throw, we can be in it with the intention of healing, or we can just go through the motions of the problem that life is throwing at us. But life is going to continue to happen. And with each stage, other challenges are going to come up that you had no idea, right? I know for me, with my journey where I'm at right now, being a new mom, that's throwing in a whole other set so I thought, okay, here I am on my healing journey, I'm doing well. And then it's like, well, now there's this stage, and now that points to other areas that I have not even, maybe I wasn't even ready to look at, but now I have to, so every stage, whatever that looks like for you, it's just going to bring in new opportunities. That's how I like to see it. New opportunities to continue expanding and continue on your journey, because it is definitely a journey. I don't think there's that necessarily an end. I think we're always going to be improving and getting better and healing, but it is a lifelong journey. And I want that. I don't want to know everything I need to know now. I want to continue, learning and integrating, healing for the rest of my life. I know there's so much there to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I feel so like it's so beautiful to even think about where we start. And like you said, there's just so many paths to healing. And I think, for those, if there was anything I could say to those that are listening, is your path is your own. Your path is your own. You will hear people will say this is how you have to heal. What I always say is your healing is your path and yours alone. Allow your intuition to guide you. Like, you know what you need, right? And so that has served me well.
So beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Patty, for being here. I'm so glad we got to finally catch up a bit. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So for folks that would like to get to know more about your work and get to know you a little bit better, how can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. You can find me at www.drpattyramirez.com. It would be drpattyramirez.com. And then, of course, my social media pages, which I will share with Rosa, but it's at dr.pattyramirez. And then if you want to check out my Wild Luna Botanicals business, you can find us on social media as wildluna_botanicals. And please don't hesitate to reach out. I am just here to continue to support and guide others to connect to their inner wisdom and their medicine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Likewise.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachettilcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.